He drove up to that house, expecting to find a grave, or at least a woman in a wheelchair who could barely lift her head. Someone who had been slowly disappearing for a year. Someone who was supposed to be gone by now. That's what the doctor said. That's what his mother had arranged. That's why he'd loaded his wife's belongings into the car, driven her to an abandoned village at the edge of nowhere, left her with a drunk woman he barely knew, and went home to wait for the inheritance, to wait for the end. But when the gate opened, and he walked into that garden, what he saw made him physically stop. Not a woman in a wheelchair, not a woman dying, but Nadezhda, his wife, standing at the top of the steps, in a beige coat, with color in her cheeks, looking at him like she had been expecting this moment for a very long time. She smiled and said, "I thought you'd come eventually." He didn't understand what was happening yet. He had absolutely no idea what she had built while he was gone, or what she was about to take from him. Stay with me all the way to the end, because what happened in that courtroom will make your jaw drop. If this pulled you in, subscribe right now. Every week I'm here with stories like this one. Real people, real betrayal, real justice. Nadezhda was not the kind of woman anyone expected to be stopped. She had ambition from childhood. She had worked her way up to assistant of a general director of a large company. She had plans for her own business someday. She was careful with money, sharp with people, always 3 steps ahead. And then, at 27 years old, she had a stroke. Just like that. Here one day, gone the next. She woke up unable to move properly, unable to speak, sitting in a wheelchair, watching the world happen without her. Her husband Vladimir was soft-spoken, almost 40, still living with his mother. He worked in insurance. His boss humiliated him. His co-workers ignored him. He had grown up so sheltered, so completely managed by his mother, that by the time he married Nadezhda, he had never made a single real decision on his own. His mother, Nina Ignatyevna, was a different creature entirely. Sharp face, hard eyes, a heavy necklace that bounced on her chest when she spoke. She had been an actress once. She never let anyone forget it. She didn't like Nadezhda. She had never liked her, because Nadezhda had ambitions, and ambitious women are inconvenient. When the stroke happened, Nina Ignatyevna did not become kind. She became impatient. She forgot medications. She skipped meals. She cared for Nadezhda only in front of other people, only when a neighbor might see. And then one evening, she sat down with Vladimir and said, "We can't go on like this." Vladimir looked at his mother and didn't say no. The room had yellow wallpaper, flower pattern, faded at the edges. Nina Ignatyevna stood near the window, her necklace catching the light, her voice low and precise. "She's an invalid, Vova. She can't move. She can't speak. The doctor said she won't last more than a year." Vladimir stared at the floor. "She's my wife." His mother made a sound, somewhere between a sigh and a contemptuous exhale. "You weren't faithful anyway. If she really mattered to you, you wouldn't have gone looking elsewhere." A pause. Vladimir said nothing. Nina Ignatyevna continued. "She'll be comfortable in her grandmother's house. Fresh air. Countryside. We'll hire a carer. We'll pay from her money. She has some. And when the time comes, there will be an inheritance. It will fix things for us." Vladimir looked up finally. He didn't ask what she meant by that. He already knew. Nadezhda was in the next room. She heard every word. She couldn't speak. She couldn't stand up and walk out. She couldn't scream. She could only sit in her wheelchair, with her hands limp in her lap, and feel the specific kind of cold that has nothing to do with temperature. The cold of realizing the person who was supposed to love you is calculating the timeline of your death. The next morning, the suitcases appeared. All of them, lined up in the hallway. Her clothes, her documents, her few personal items. Vladimir packed them, He didn't meet her eyes. He carried each bag with that particular determination of a man who has made a decision he cannot unmake, and is moving fast enough not to feel it. Nina Ignatievna stood in the doorway and watched. She smiled when she caught Nadezhda's gaze. "Don't worry. Fresh village air. The doctor says it helps. You might even enjoy the year." The year. She said it like a sentence. Nadezhda looked at her, and in her chest, beneath the stroke, beneath the silence, beneath the wheelchair, something ignited. Not grief, not despair, something harder than both. Something that had been waiting for the right moment. The neighbor Ninotchka passed by in the stairwell. She stopped, asked where they were going. Nina Ignatievna lit up instantly. "Oh, we're taking Nadia to a rehabilitation center. Terribly expensive, but what can you do? She's done so much for us." The moment Ninotchka was gone, the smile dropped. Vladimir picked up the last bag. They carried Nadezhda down 20 flights of stairs. Because the elevator was broken, Vladimir wouldn't stop apologizing about that. As if the elevator was the problem. The village was far. The kind of far where the radio signal disappears. Where the roads thin out and the trees close in. Where everything gets very, very quiet. The house was Nadezhda's grandmother's. She had loved it as a child. Now it sat behind a broken gate. Overgrown. Silent. Weeds taller than the fence posts. On a bench outside, a woman was lying. Short hair. Swollen face. A bruise under one eye. Mismatched clothes. A yellow t-shirt with English writing. Green shorts. Pink-heeled shoes with rhinestones. She stood up when the car stopped. And swayed. Galina. That was her name. The carer. Vladimir had found her in a village nearby. He handed her a thin envelope. She counted the money with practiced speed. Nodded. Done. He helped Nadezhda out of the car. Unfolded her wheelchair. Arranged her in it. Then stood in front of her. And exhaled. "Nadia, you understand I don't have a choice. You'll have your own carer here. We'll use your money to pay for everything. And the fresh air will help." Nadezhda looked at him. With her eyes. Just her eyes. And he looked away immediately. Because whatever he saw there, he couldn't face. He got in the car. He drove away. He didn't look in the rearview mirror once. Or if he did, he made sure he didn't let himself see what was in it. Behind him, in the falling afternoon light, Nadezhda sat in her wheelchair, watching the car disappear, and Galina swayed beside her, smelling of alcohol and something else entirely. A long silence, and then Nadezhda stood up. Galina stared, her mouth open, her eyes wide as plates. The woman who was supposed to be near dead was standing, on her own 2 feet, looking at her directly, like someone who had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. Nadezhda spoke quietly. "Galina, let's make an arrangement." And she laid it out. Clearly, practically. Galina would receive the same amount she was being paid by Vladimir. She would report to him that nothing had changed. That Nadezhda remained in her wheelchair. That her condition was stable, meaning slowly declining. She would never tell him what she'd seen. In return, she would be paid. Reliably. Monthly. Without drama. Galina blinked. Looked at the money Nadezhda held out. Took it. And walked away without another word. Nadezhda stood in the abandoned garden. Listened to the silence. Breathed the cold autumn air. And felt something that had been impossible in that yellow wallpaper apartment. Space. She pulled out the phone that Nina Ignatievna had never found. Dialed the one number she trusted. "Come," she said. "It happened exactly like you said it would." An hour and a half later, a car pulled up. A tall woman stepped out. Strict navy suit. Strong posture. Sharp eyes. Tatiana. Nadezhda's closest friend. Her colleague from the firm. The woman who had warned her about Vladimir years ago. The woman who had refused to be a bridesmaid at the wedding. The woman who, 2 years earlier, sitting in a small restaurant over wine and salads, had looked Nadezhda directly in the eyes and said, "Your Vladimir would sell his own mother for money. Don't tell him about the inheritance." And Nadezhda had argued. She had defended her husband. She had believed in him. And now she sat in a grandmother's kitchen, in a village at the edge of nowhere, listening to the quiet. And Tatiana walked in, set down bags, wine, food, supplies, looked at the kitchen, looked at Nadezhda, and said, "I'm not going to say I told you so." "You already did," said Nadezhda. "Fair enough. Eat something. We have a lot to plan." They sat at the table until late that night. And by the time the candle burned down, Nadezhda had a plan. Not to survive. Not just to survive. To build. Here's what Nadezhda had never told Vladimir. Or Nina Ignatyevna. Or anyone except Tatiana. The stroke was real. The disability was real. The wheelchair was real. But the prognosis? That had been arranged. When Nadezhda received the inheritance letter from Germany, her grandmother on her father's side, a woman who had married a German and moved away when Nadezhda's father was a child, she had immediately remembered Tatiana's warning. She had seen Vladimir's face when she told the family. That pure, unguarded, instantly calculated joy. Not happiness for her. Not relief. The specific brightness of a man who has just been told the number. And so she had gone back to the clinic, to a doctor she trusted, a friend of Tatiana's, and asked for a favor. She needed a diagnosis, a real-sounding, believable, terminal-adjacent diagnosis. For her husband, she needed to know what he would do. She needed to be certain, because she had given Vladimir everything. She had loved him through his cowardice, through his mother, through years of shrinking herself to fit a space that never got larger. She needed to know for absolute certain, before she decided what came next. The diagnosis was delivered. Vladimir had nodded. Nina Ignatyevna had smiled. And within 3 weeks, Nadezhda was in a wheelchair in an abandoned village, with a drunk woman paid to watch her die. She had her answer. Now she had a different question. What was she going to build with it? The house took 2 weeks to clean. Nadezhda did it herself. Every surface, every corner. She found her grandmother's old linen dress in a wardrobe. She put it on. She opened the windows. She aired the whole thing out. The garden was more complicated. The grass was taller than her waist in places. And then one morning, she heard a sound, a rhythmic swishing. She looked out the window and saw a man, tall, dark-haired, work clothes, serious face, standing in her garden, cutting the grass with an old scythe. He worked in long, even strokes, like someone who had done this 10,000 times. Nadezhda opened the window. "What are you doing?" He looked up, didn't apologize, didn't explain, just said, in that particular way of someone who considers extra words a waste, "Cutting the grass." She stared at him. "Why?" He went back to work without answering. His name was Nikolai. He was the local farmer. He had been there for 8 years. He had a farm at the end of the village. Animals, large vegetable plots, a few workers. He had come from the city originally. No one quite knew why he'd stayed. He never said. Nadezhda walked out to the porch. "How much do I owe you?" He didn't stop working. For food. That was their entire negotiation. Over the following weeks, they fell into a rhythm that neither of them had designed. Nikolai appeared in the mornings. He fixed things. The gate, the window, a cracked pipe. He never announced himself. He never asked permission. He just arrived and started working. And Nadezhda made breakfast. It was an exchange so simple and honest that it almost embarrassed her. She was used to contracts, negotiations, formal agreements in triplicate. This man had no interest in any of that. He fixed. She fed. Done. She began to study him the way she studied everything, carefully and with full attention. She noticed he was capable. She noticed he was quiet in a way that wasn't shy. It was a conscious choice, like a man who had learned at some point that silence is more efficient than speech. She noticed a girl from the village came and threatened her one afternoon. Nikolai's name came up. Nadezhda told him. He didn't look embarrassed. He just said, "Were you frightened?" "No," she said. "I've been threatened by grown men in suits, in conference rooms, 5 of them at once. One village woman is not my limit." He almost smiled. She was almost certain she saw it. And somewhere in that almost smile, something shifted between them. Not quickly, not dramatically, just quietly, the way the best things always do. 1 month after arriving in the village, Nadezhda overheard something at the local shop. The farmer's operation was in trouble. Financial trouble. Real trouble. The kind that would cost people their jobs in a place where there were very few jobs to begin with. She walked to his farm, found him in a tiny office, papers everywhere, calculator in hand, looking at numbers that clearly weren't adding up. She walked in. He looked up. "Bad time," he said. "I know," she said. "Let me help. I handle my own affairs." "I can see that." She sat down, picked up the papers. She looked at the numbers for exactly 3 minutes. And then she said, "Do you actually need 3 refrigerated delivery runs per day? Or do you just need 1 good one?" Nikolai stared at her. "Or better question," she continued, "why does someone running a small village farm have the cost structure of a medium-sized city supplier?" He opened his mouth, closed it. She was already making notes. They worked until darkness fell. The farm workers had all gone home. The animals were quiet. And when they walked out together under the dark sky, she breathed in the cold air and felt something she hadn't felt in over a year. Purpose. Specific. Practical. Real. Nikolai said, "What happened to you?" "The stroke story. You said you'd tell me someday." Nadezhda looked at the stars and started talking. A year passed. Vladimir came back. One cloudy autumn day. His dark blue car rolled up to the house. He parked. He walked to the gate. He stopped. The garden was neat. The fence was painted. The windows were clean. A stone path ran through blooming flowers. He rang the bell. A bright, clear voice answered, "Kolya, is that you? You're early."
Vladimir froze.
That voice. He knew that voice. The gate opened, and Nadezhda stood at the top of the steps. Alive, standing, healthy, in a coat the color of cream, looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Not anger, not sadness, something measured, something that had been prepared in advance. "Vladimir," she said, "I was wondering when you'd come."
Come in.
"I'll make tea." He stepped inside. His legs were moving. His brain had not caught up yet. He sat in a large, beautiful room. She brought tea. She sat across from him, and she told him everything. The plan, the fake diagnosis, the real story. She told him about the recording she had made, the conversations she had documented, the investigator she had hired, the evidence she had collected. She told him calmly, the way you tell someone something when you've been waiting a year to say it.
Vladimir stared.
His cup of tea grew cold in his hands. He tried several times to speak. Each time he found he had nothing. And then Tatiana walked in, with a folder and a schedule of court dates. The courtroom was small. High ceilings, wooden benches, a red-haired judge with wire-rimmed glasses and the expression of a woman who had seen everything twice. Vladimir was there. Nina Ignatyevna was there. She had brought character witnesses, neighbors, friends, anyone who would speak to Nadezhda's bad character. Nina Ignatyevna took the stand herself. She had been an actress, and she performed. She wept about how she had cared for Nadezhda, how she had been up 3 nights worrying, how she had devoted herself to a woman who never appreciated her. The tears were real, or they looked real. The judge listened, and then Tatiana stood up. Your Honor, I'd like to play 2 recordings. The first was the conversation between Vladimir and Galina, the drunk woman, discussing how little it mattered whether Nadezhda was actually cared for. The doctor said she won't last long anyway. The second recording was Nina Ignatyevna on the phone with Vladimir. Did you feed her today? A pause. I got a bit caught up reading. I forgot. But it's fine. She barely eats anyway. The courtroom went very still. The judge looked at Nina Ignatyevna. Nina Ignatyevna looked at her hands. Then Tatiana outlined the finances. Vladimir's application for division of assets. His claim on the house. The farm income. The German inheritance. She laid it out simply. The house was transferred to Nikolai Petrov Gorlev 1 week before the lawsuit was filed. Therefore, it cannot be divided. The inheritance is by bloodline and does not qualify as marital property. However, Vladimir Mihailovich Lvov's apartment was substantially renovated during the marriage, using funds from my client's salary and personal savings. Therefore, it qualifies as jointly acquired. Vladimir's lawyer jumped up. Tatiana was ready. Evidence of the renovation contracts, bank records, builder testimony, everything. The judge listened to all of it, withdrew, returned, delivered her ruling. Vladimir's apartment, partially transferred to Nadezhda. His car shared. Half of his savings transferred. His claim on Nadezhda's assets dismissed entirely. He walked out of that courtroom with significantly less than he had arrived with. Nina Ignatyevna said nothing. For possibly the first time in her life, she just stared at the floor, and the necklace on her chest was finally still. Outside the courthouse, Nadezhda stood in the afternoon light, Nikolai beside her, Tatiana already organizing the paperwork. We got everything, Tatiana said. Nadezhda nodded. She didn't feel triumphant. Not in the way she had expected. She mostly felt finished, like something that had been sitting heavily in her chest for a very long time had finally been set down. Nikolai took her hand, the way he had taken it once before, on the road in the dark, when she had finished telling him her story. He didn't say anything dramatic. He rarely did. He just held on, and she let him. Later, back at the house, Tatiana opened the wine she had brought. She poured 3 glasses. She looked at Nadezhda's slightly rounded silhouette, paused, looked at Nikolai, looked back at Nadezhda. How long have you known? Nadezhda smiled. A few weeks. A silence. Then Tatiana said, very carefully, is there something you'd like to ask me? Would you like to be godmother? Tatiana laughed. Not a polite laugh. A real one. The kind that comes out when everything has landed right. I don't think you have another choice. Nikolai smiled. We don't, he confirmed. They sat in the kitchen until late. 3 glasses of wine. 1 glass of water. The fire burning steadily. And outside, the village was dark and quiet. The way good things always are, when they don't need to announce themselves. There's something in this story that I've been sitting with. Nadezhda didn't just survive. She tested. Before she gave up on Vladimir. Before she walked away. Before she made any final decision. She needed to know. Really know. Not suspect. Not fear. No. And that's a distinction worth thinking about. Because it's very easy in a painful situation to make a massive decision based on fear. Based on a feeling. Based on what your best friend told you 3 years ago. Nadezhda took the harder road. She gathered evidence. She gave her husband the conditions in which his true nature could emerge. He failed the test completely. But at least she knew. At least there was no version of herself somewhere in the future, lying awake wondering, what if I had been wrong? What if I had left someone who was actually good? She didn't have that doubt, because she had done the work of finding the truth. And the truth, ugly as it was, set her free. Here's what I've learned from stories like this. The people who hurt you are rarely mysterious. They usually show you exactly who they are. The question is whether you're watching, whether you're willing to see what's actually there, rather than what you hoped would be. Nadezhda watched. She saw. She built something from it. That's not revenge. That's just wisdom applied at the right moment. If the story got under your skin, if any part of it felt familiar, subscribe right now. Every single week I bring you stories like this one. Stories about ordinary people facing extraordinary betrayals. And sometimes, extraordinary comebacks. Now I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments. What would you have done in Nadezhda's place? Would you have tested him the same way? Or would you have confronted him immediately? Walked out the moment the suitcases appeared? There's no right answer. I genuinely want to know where you land on this one. And next week, I have a story about a woman who received a phone call at 2 a.m. from a number that belonged to her husband, except her husband had been dead for 6 years. And the voice on the other end knew things that only he could know. That one is going to follow you around for days. Same place, same time. Don't miss it.